Hi, last weekend I watched Steven Soderbergh's The Laundromat, a 2019 film for Netflix based on the non-fiction book about the discovery of the Panama Papers, about how figures across the globe had been using a law company called Mossack Fonseca. I believe that's how it was pronounced, to evade tax laws across the world. Um, Avoid tax laws across the world through shell companies and creative accountancy, and effectively avoid their obligations to public life. The film is told in several fractured narratives. Our main one involves a woman whose husband dies in a tragic ferry accident. A tour ferry is capsized and he's knocked unconscious and drowns. But it turns out that the insurance company with which the ferry had been reinsured is owned by a shell of a shell of a shell, and she's not going to get any compensation for what happened. And as she investigates, she starts to tunnel down and discover more and more stories about what's gone on with this company, about the various figures who use the company's facilities for fraud and deception, gradually uncover their own culpability. Um, it's a complex story to talk about because it's a very complex script. It's a typical Steven Soderbergh mosaic style story with a complex script by Scott Z. Burns. But it's made, I think, a lot more palatable and more digestible by the way it's presented. It has a style very much borrowed, borrowed in the legal sense, from Big Short, where you have big star names telling the camera what's going on. The two lawyers who run the company are played by Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas, and narrate to the camera how this thing works, how their borderline legal structures actually work to conceal earnings from tax all over the world and basically to shelter the rich from having to contribute to the lives of everybody else. It makes it more coherent and gives it an overall structure, but it also underlines that they basically got away with it. That even though the Panama Papers were exposed, nothing has really changed, and that corporate funding of political parties across the world, particularly in the US and the UK, has basically continued unabated and allows this kind of fraud to continue to the detriment of everyone who works for a living. And the film does end with a call to arms that this needs to change. Something has to be done about the dishonesty and greed that's perpetrated at the highest levels of government all over the world. But the film itself never gets too far from templates that it knows works. It feels very much like a repeat of The Big Short. It feels very much like a polemical piece where you have people telling the camera about how terrible this is. And indeed it is terrible. But there's never any there's never a sense of anything fresh. Soderbergh is a great experimenter. So many of his films go off in strange, unexpected directions. He will do strange things. He's recently re-edited one of his earlier films as a black and white silent film. Um, he's he's a big risk taker, and I feel that this film is not that big a risk, particularly when it's a film about this kind of corruption being released by Netflix. Which, not to say that Netflix is corrupt, but they are very secretive about things that they wouldn't necessarily need to be secretive about how massively successful all their movies are. But we're not going to tell you exactly how successful. You just have to trust us, which doesn't inspire confidence. So it's a film that says something that we need to hear, but it does it through quite a tried and tested medium. And I suppose that's maybe to the film's advantage. You don't want anything that's going to be too extreme when the message is more important, but it does mean that the film feels a bit less special than it should.